Well, they're the two certainties in life, death and taxes. Tonight, the well-known companies accused of not paying their fair share of tax in Australia. As Ben McCormack reports, there are now calls for the government and the taxman to get tougher.
Why are these companies paying little or no tax?
The average Australian would be horrified.
Look, there's no doubt IKEA is the greatest con of the lot.
It is theft.
We should say to them, you either pay the tax here or rack off, we don't want you here.
It's perhaps the greatest con being perpetrated on the Australian public. And our government is letting it happen.
For some reason, our politicians are so weak. They're just not game to stand up to these multinationals.
They're gutless.
They're gutless.
Australia is losing billions of dollars every year, siphoned overseas by greedy multinationals so they don't have to pay their fair share of tax, while ordinary, hard-working Australian businesses and low-paid workers are left to carry the load.
I really believe it's very unfair.
What they're getting away with will shock you.
Obscene profits. These are super profits that these companies are making, and all we're asking for is for them to pay their fair share.
Tonight, we name and shame the companies responsible, as there are fresh calls for the government to finally do something about it.
They need to put somebody in charge of the tax office that's got courage to go after these tax cheats.
IKEA has been overcharging Australians for years, but what you might not know is that they also ship most of their profits offshore to avoid paying tax. They made more than $1 billion in revenue, but paid a tax rate of just 3%.
We already know it rips off Australians by charging a lot more because it can. It's admitted that, oh, we can charge more here in Australia. Australians are fools, so that's what we'll do. But it wouldn't be so bad if at least, say, 30% went to the taxpayer, went to the common good of Australia. But it doesn't. They hardly pay any tax here. IKEA is a serial offender.
The problem, of course, is that they're competing against the ordinary furniture manufacturer in Australia who has to pay tax at the 30% rate. And so you haven't got a level playing field.
For 2 years, Fairfax journalist Michael West has been investigating and exposing the companies who don't pay their fair share. His latest exclusive hit the front page yesterday. Rupert Murdoch's News Corp caught out shipping an obscene amount of money offshore.
They must be victors and not victims.
$4.5 billion repatriated, is what they call it, a very exotic term, to the US from News Corp's Australian media assets. So $4.5 billion ripped out, virtually tax-free, and sent to New York.
And that's not all. Aussie taxpayers also paid News Corp a refund on their annual tax return.
$882 million cash.
So the Australian taxpayer paid News Corp $882 million.
That's correct.
How should ordinary Aussie taxpayers feel about that?
Very, very angry about it, because there's no reason for them to win that money from taxpayers because they made no losses in the first place. And even if they did, it's all to do with paper shuffling and fancy tax work.
Glencore is Australia's biggest coal company, but its headquarters are located in the tax haven of Switzerland.
They didn't pay any tax last year, the coal part of it, the holdings company here. In fact, they got a rebate of around 10 to 15 million from the tax office as well, despite making revenues of $3 to $4 billion.
Then there's the huge multinational Shell oil and gas business.
They make about $20 billion in revenue, and they didn't pay any tax last year. $20 billion in revenue.
Every bit of tax these multinationals evade means you and I have got to pay more. We don't like paying tax, but we love the fact that we've got a strong police force, we have defence, we have a good education system, we have good roads, and compared to other countries, we have fantastic hospitals. All of those things mainly come from the tax we pay. That's why I don't personally mind paying tax, but it really gets me angry when these big foreign multinationals avoid the tax and we let them get away with it. It's our government, the problem. We should say to them, you either pay the tax here or rack off, we don't want you here.
Dick Smith has long campaigned for everyone to pay their fair share, including James Hardie and Microsoft, and of course, Apple. It made $6 billion in revenues in Australia, but paid just $80 million in tax.
And what I can't get over is that you walk into, say, the Apple shop and everyone's sitting there smiling. We should be saying to them, hold on, you might be an Aussie working for Apple, but why doesn't your company pay their bloody tax? And why don't you rack off from Australia if you don't pay a fair rate of tax here?
This is the world's biggest company. They should be paying hundreds of millions. In fact, they should be paying probably about $1 billion because they've got high margin profits.
Perhaps the sneakiest company of all is Google. The tech giant made an estimated $2 billion in profits last year, but paid a paltry $295,000 in tax.
That's less tax than I pay as an individual. It's outrageous. They should be paying hundreds of millions of dollars.
These companies are able to do it by either shipping their profits offshore, whether it's Singapore, Ireland or the Netherlands, disguised as payments to parent companies, or repayments on money that they've effectively loaned to themselves. For example, Foxtel. It uses its profits to pay back a loan to News Corp and Telstra, the companies that own it. Yep, they're effectively paying a loan back to themselves.
The whole game for these companies is not making a taxable profit in Australia, because if you make a profit, you have to pay tax on it.
We're talking about billions of dollars of tax income that should be going into our roads, our schools and our hospitals, because that's the kind of country that we've worked hard to build.
The situation is now so bad that an ordinary Aussie on average weekly earnings pays an effective tax rate of 22.7% of their income, while the top 900 corporate companies are paying just 19.3%, when they should be paying 30%.
I don't see how I can do anything other than pay my fair share of tax.
Kay Doyle runs childcare centres. By the time she pays her wages, rent and her fair share of tax, there's not much left.
We're all struggling to meet our tax responsibilities, and to have someone that can afford to pay more offloading overseas is, I think, grossly unfair.
We are a nation of lifters, not leaners.
We've got a Treasurer and a Prime Minister that is going after those that can least afford it.
David O'Byrne is from United Voice, which has just released a report with the Tax Justice Network about who really are the leaners and who really are the lifters in our community. It's believed more than $24 billion in revenue is siphoned out of the country every year thanks to tax-dodging companies. Now imagine what we could do with that kind of money. The schools, the hospitals, the roads, the social infrastructure. And as for that budget deficit that we hear so much about, well, that money could help put a big dent in that, helping bringing us back to surplus. So, is our Treasurer Joe Hockey going after these big boys? Well, no, he's not. Instead, he's now suggesting that we lower the corporate tax rate and then possibly increase the GST.
He's being led around by the nose like a pony at the show by corporate Australia, and I think most ordinary working people are saying, Treasurer, Prime Minister, if you're going to make a captain's call, how about you make a captain's call that look after ordinary working people?
We're meant to be the lifters, and these guys, the richest of the rich, the most powerful, are the leaners.
Tomorrow, a Senate inquiry is set to begin hearings into corporate tax avoidance.
Every Aussie knows it would be fair for huge companies like IKEA, like Apple, to pay a fair rate of tax. And I think most of us say, if you're not going to pay a fair rate of tax, rack off, we don't want you here.
And expected to appear before that Senate committee are the bosses of those companies accused of not paying their fair share of tax.